you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join Doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
I love when we talk about topics that can be a little tricky. And this episode, when we talk about beyond resilience, is just one of those topics because resilience can mean different things, especially to those who practice medicine. And today I'll be talking to my amazing co-host, Dr. Joanne Sotelo, psychiatrist and physician coach. And she's going to help us think a little differently about resilience. And I would love to hear from you, Joanne, just what are different ways to think about that word that can be so encompassing for us?
I love the question because resilience is one of those words that I like to use a lot, but I am always very conscious about how different people hear the word resilience. And it's a good question to start with of when you, the listener, here's the word resilience, what comes to mind, not just in terms of definition, but the emotion, because for some people it's kind of neutral. For some people it could be quite strong. And resilience is often defined as an ability to bounce back, and I'm using my air quotes. But for physicians, it's not just about pushing through. It's about that bouncing forward in a healthier way. And we can stay here for a while because, again, it's not about being stronger or stretch yourself beyond what you're already stretched out, which is what a lot of times we hear. It's what do you need to feel better? It's not about working more or doing more than our already superhuman selves that we believe we are sometimes. It's what do you need to really recover in your overall well-being, physically, emotionally, and mentally, spiritually, all the things. That's how I like to think about it. And with that, it's also that term that has been used in psychology as well, which is that post-traumatic growth. So when we go through difficult things, it not that we're asking for bad things to happen, but we're forced to grow, and it's what can we learn after the struggle, and that deeper meaning, renewed priorities, stronger relationships, all those things. So if this helps, again, just giving you a different way to think of the word resilience so that you use it in your favor for yourself, for your own improvement of your well-being. That's how I like to think about it.
I love that. And the visual that I get is that sometimes we can stretch ourselves too far, and like a rubber band, we snap, versus stretching enough to use that force of the rubber band stretching to then come back together, kind of working for you instead of against you, but being careful about keeping things in the balance. And Joanne, you talked a little bit about this. Why is it so important to understand this word, resilience, as a woman in medicine?
Yes, and I'm going to use your analogy of the rubber band because I love it too. Because the other way that I think about it, and I think this is how a lot of people think of resilience, that, if you stretch a rubber band, if you stretch it abruptly, it can break. But that's not how it usually is for us. It's that little bit of a stretch, and we keep on giving. And then what can happen is that we lose form. We lose our ability to kind of get back to that kind of very strong, stretchy self. We lose a lot of our abilities, and that's what we want to avoid. It's not the resilience that we want. We want to be able to recognize when we're stretching beyond our norm, but making sure that we come back to whatever norm we want for ourselves, right? Like in our own strength, and what's that growth that we need, because we are at such high risk of distress and burnout, because we do have so many pressures as women in medicine. And then we deal with comparison, microaggressions, perfectionism, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all those things that we've discussed in this podcast, and the cultural stigma. And there's an impact to all of this. So it's important to recognize it, and it's different person to person. And this is why these conversations are important, and why maybe there's that reaction, because I think we go to conferences or we listen to administration that maybe a lot of the reaction comes from there, and they talk about resilience like it's just, you guys are awesome, it's superpower, you're so resilient. And we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear just, you're so great, just go do more. We want to hear of, let's make some changes so that we don't have to be stretching ourselves so much. But it is still our individual responsibility to recognize, not that it's always easy to just say, oh, I'm not going to do that because I'm stretching beyond my bandwidth, right? Like, so sometimes we do need to say it out loud, but it is still up to us to recognize all those things that we've talked about in this podcast so often, of how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we feeling mentally, emotionally, physically, so that we keep our form as much as we can, so that we know I might be in a time, in a season when I'm stretched out a little bit more than I want to, but I know when it's important, I can get back to myself and have that presence for my well-being and for those around me. And again, it's the things that we talk about in this podcast so much. I obviously get very passionate about this because these are important conversations, and there's a lot that we can do individually in our small circle and put our 2 cents for the kind of upstream change that we want to see.
And this brings up a point where you talk about keeping your form, because you can, I think, stretch a rubber band so that it loses some of its stretch, but it doesn't break. And that to me says maybe our listener is like, man, I'm trying to stay at this job. It's got great benefits and I'm supporting my family. We need the income. I can't afford to back off on my FTE, my full-time equivalent. And yet, at some point, is it going to be too much? For my own journey, when I was doing child abuse medicine, at a decade in, I was like, that's a whole lot of trauma. Being the medical director during the pandemic, I was hearing the worst of the worst, and the stories just got exponentially worse. And I recognized, and I'm grateful for the insight, saying, I think if I stay in this too long, I'm not going to potentially be able to get back to my baseline form. It might do too much damage, the long-term trauma exposure. And I chose to walk away or go first part-time and then, retire early. Some might consider, and do the coaching, because I didn't want to stretch so far that I either broke or couldn't get my form back, that it would have a negative impact. And I would encourage our listeners to really pay attention. What is your baseline form? Get curious, spend some time with yourself. Maybe ask your partner or your kids, a trusted friend, so that you get some clarity, because sometimes they see things that we don't. And I love that you are helping raise our awareness, Joanne, about not just resilience and what it is, but also what's beyond resilience, and becoming aware of that. And as we always like to share with our listener, Joanne, I know you have some ideas about what can we do.
And I want to start with a distinction to help with however you want to name resilience for yourself, or your ability to keep form. I like that. But without numbing out, because we're good at minimizing, we're good at pushing out, and that's not what we want. We want to really feel what we want to feel and have that full awareness. So one thing that we can do, it's kind of so neat, is the story reframing. So even asking, what did I learn from this? How can this experience help myself in the future or others? So that's one. Second one, our big doctor brains, we like to think of the whole picture and how we make everything better. And we need to think of micro recoveries. So this short intentional breaks, again, you've heard Erin and I talk about this, deep breathing, taking 1-2 minutes of break, listening to calm music. things that reset your nervous system, especially if you're in the middle of work. Third, one of our favorites, peer connection, sharing openly to someone you trust. And like I joke that sometimes if I had a difficult session, I would go down the hallway and I will go to my secretary, and I would sometimes talk about something very specific, or sometimes we talked about shoes or chocolate, right? Like it still served my brain as a break. It gave me, it kind of allowed my brain to complete that loop with that patient. I could get a reset and for myself and then for the next patient, or coming home to your family. Fourth, self-compassion. You've heard me talk about this so much, and it's simple things that you can speak to yourself as if you were your own best friend, because we're sometimes our worst enemy and we beat ourselves up. We're so judgmental to ourselves, and we know that this can reduce shame and foster recovery even after a stressful time. And then the fifth one is checking in. This is a little bit deeper work, and this is something that both Erin and I do a lot in our when we're coaching, is checking in with our values in this season of our lives and making sure that we're in alignment. Like there are things that we might be doing at some season in our lives that seems good and it's not that draining. And then there's other times that we're like, no, I don't want to do this anymore, or I don't want to do it this way or for this long. And that's really good way to build that way to get back to your well-being and get back to your form in a very authentic way, which is different than our typical just push through, just work harder, that we know doesn't work.
I love that. Joanne, you've helped us understand so much more about resilience and beyond resilience, and raising our awareness about, I love how you talked about bouncing forward and asking, what do I need to recover in my well-being, not just a push and grind through, which so oftentimes seems to be our default mode, and the importance of keeping our form, and then what we can do about it. You really talk about some basic things that we all have at our disposal, that a reset, peer connection, self-compassion, being your own best friend instead of your worst enemy. So beautiful. And then making sure what you're doing is in alignment or relevant to your life today. And with that, I wonder, is there one more piece of wisdom, Joanne, that you'd like to share with our listener?
Yes. If it helps, maybe redefining and reclaiming resilience as healing and growth, which we know is essential for long-term fulfillment and life balance.
I love that. And if you have been listening to our podcast and appreciating or enjoying what you're learning, maybe putting some new things into practice, and you think it would be helpful to someone you know, don't hesitate to share this episode or do a review if you haven't done so already. We'd appreciate it, and stay tuned because the next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaningin medicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.